India's Prime Minister Manmohan Singh has built a reputation as a clean politician amid a sea of corruption. But that carefully crafted image is fast unravelling under an avalanche of accusations over his role in the so-called Colgate corruption scandal. Earlier this month, an auditors report found the government sold coal mining rights to private companies at a fraction of their market value, costing taxpayers billions. Mr Singh was coal minister when the sales went through. Professor Arun Kumar is from the Centre for Economic Studies and Planning at Jawaharlal University in New Delhi. He spoke with South Asia correspondent Michael Edwards.
Thank you for joining us. Dr Arun Kumar, thank you for joining us on the program. How does the government get this so wrong? How does the government allocate coal licences so that they miss out on more than $30 billion in potential revenue?
In India, when decisions are taken, they're taken on a variety of political factors and economic factors. It's not a purely economic decision that the government takes. Second reality of India is that there's a very large black economy. And black economy means incomes on which taxes are not paid, incomes which are illegally generated and so on. And this kind of income is generated by a nexus between the politician, the businessman and the executive. So in a sense, crony capitalism. So India's decision making over the last at least 40 to 50 years has been characterized by growing crony capitalism. So in this particular case, what has happened is that the government has allotted these coal blocks to the favored companies, to various other entities, and they have given a windfall gain to these. So in a sense, it's not that the government has got it wrong, but it is a deliberate ploy by the political leadership to show favors to the companies and to other economic entities which they wanted to favor. Now, what the opposition is saying is that this is done to generate funds for the party, to generate funds for individual decision makers. And that is why it's called a scam.
Yeah, well, what you're talking about is essentially corruption, isn't it?
It is. So when we're talking about black economy, then corruption is an aspect of the black economy where incomes are generated by showing favors to the ones that you want to favor. So here in this case, when we say that the coal blocks have been allocated to all these entities where some of them had nothing to do with energy, they had nothing to do with either coal production or energy production or steel which uses coal intensively or other such industries, then the impression is strengthened that all this was done to favor a few.
Let's put this type of money into context. We're talking more than $30 billion, $33 billion is the figure many people are quoting. What sort of impact would that have on the budget bottom line here in India?
You see, the entire budget deficit of the country, which is called the fiscal deficit, would have been wiped out if this kind of money had been acquired by the government rather than being allowed to go as windfall gains to these companies. And therefore, in a sense, when we say that India lacks education, and it is said that we are lacking in education because we don't have the funds, we could have put a lot of this money into education. Similarly, health standards are very poor because India is spending inadequate amounts on health. So we could have spent much more on health. Similarly, our infrastructure is lacking, whether it be roads, whether it be ports, whether it be railways. So this kind of money would have resolved a lot of the infrastructure problems also that India is facing. So in other words, budget shortages for expenditures on essentials, those would have been considerably taken care of if this coal block allocation been correctly done and these funds had been acquired by the government rather than being allowed as windfall gains to these private companies and the public sector companies.
Look, up until this stage, one of the strengths of the Indian government has been the reputation of Manmohan Singh himself. Now, he's directly implicated in this because he was the coal minister at the time. What has this done to his reputation?
See, his reputation has been considerably sullied in the country because one after the other we see that the UPA government is getting embroiled in scams. And it really began in 2010 with the scam about housing allocation to the war widows, called the Other Society scam in Mumbai. And then came the Commonwealth Games scam, and then came the 2G Spectrum scam, and then we had the Hassan Ali case, and then we have had many other cases. So one after the other scams are breaking out, and each scam seems to be bigger than the previous one. So this coal scam is bigger than the earlier big scam, the 2G spectrum scam, or the ISRO scam on the allocation of spectrum. So in other words, Manmohan Singh's government's image has been really mud for the last at least 2 years, and this is adding on to that. However, the opposition is very divided, because to take advantage of a weak UPA, you require an opposition which would also take advantage of that situation. But the main and the principal opposition, the NDA, within which the dominant group is BJP, itself is a house divided, itself seems to be floundering, and many of the state governments which belong to the NDA, they seem to be also involved in corruption.
In the short term, though, have they got any chance of making Manmohan Singh resign, as they are trying to do in Parliament at the moment?
It seems doubtful that they'll succeed, because the government has files on the opposition party leaders also. And what the government has been doing is using these files to get votes from the opposition parties. Okay. So for instance, on the nuclear deal, we suddenly found that the Samajwadi Party backed the UPA won. Similarly, recently, when the votes were taken, both the Samajwadi Party and the BSP from the Uttar Pradesh, the largest state of the country, they backed the Manmohan Singh government. So government has worked out a way by which it can play politics with corruption and get the vote. So as long as that happens, they will not be able to displace Manmohan Singh. The only way Manmohan Singh's government might go is if suddenly the Nehru-Gandhi family decides that Rahul Gandhi must come in now. But that seems also doubtful. So at the moment, it doesn't seem like Manmohan Singh would resign. It doesn't look like the UPA-2 government would fall. It would continue to flounder like it has been doing in the last 2 years, where decision-making has been very difficult. Investments are slowing down. Rate of growth of the economy is slowing down. Current account deficit is very high. The fiscal deficit is high. So all kinds of economic, political and social problems are there. But the government is continuing to flounder along. And I think that's the way it will continue for the coming year and a half or so, till the time of the 2014 elections.
Dr. Kumar, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.